The diner buzzed with the usual afternoon crowd, the smell of coffee and fried food thick in the air. Nora, the waitress, moved gracefully between tables, her tired smile never faltering, though her eyes were sharp. She placed mugs down, took orders, and cleaned up spills with practiced care, ignoring the occasional rude comment. The bell above the door jingled loudly, and everyone glanced up as a man stepped inside with an air of authority. He wore a tailored suit that screamed power, and his presence seemed to press down on the entire diner. The billionaire had a reputation for arrogance, and his sharp eyes scanned the room as if judging every face. He stopped at the counter, his gaze settling on Nora, who met it without flinching, a subtle challenge in her stare. "You're nothing." He barked suddenly, his voice slicing through the hum of conversation. Silencing nearby tables, Nora froze for a moment, gripping her order pad tightly, but she didn't lower her eyes or shrink back. Instead, she straightened her posture, taking a deliberate step forward, her voice calm yet firm. "Then why do you answer me?" she said, her tone steady, refusing to show fear or submission. The billionaire blinked, caught off guard by her boldness, a flicker of surprise crossing his usually stern features. Patrons at nearby tables whispered to each other, sensing a tense standoff unfolding in the middle of the diner. Nora placed a steaming cup of coffee on his table with precision, her hands unwavering despite the tension. "I answer because I want to, not because you demand it," she added, her gaze unwavering, steady as stone. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp expression faltering, unsure how to respond to her fearless words. "You think you can talk back to me?" he hissed, his voice low but edged with anger, fingers tapping the counter. "Yes," she replied softly, but with a quiet confidence that made him pause, a strange unease in his stance. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift in power, the table slowly tilting in her favor. Her calm defiance carried weight, and the billionaire realized that intimidation wasn't working on her. Nora continued taking orders from other tables, moving with grace, but keeping a watchful eye on him. He sat back, studying her every motion, a mix of frustration and fascination crossing his face. She was unlike anyone he had met, unafraid, composed, and unwavering in her stance against his power. The diner's hum resumed slowly, but there was a different energy now, a tension that vibrated in the air. "You're not like the others," he said finally, his voice quieter, almost reflective, his tone unsteady. "I've learned not to be," she replied, setting down another plate with careful precision, ever breaking eye contact. The billionaire's usual confidence wavered, the first time in years someone had truly stood their ground against him. He leaned back, absorbing the lesson in humility without fully realizing it, an unfamiliar respect forming slowly. Nora wiped down a table, her movements deliberate and composed, carrying herself with quiet authority. Every glance from the billionaire seemed to linger, studying her defiance with a mixture of intrigue and disbelief. She didn't seek attention, didn't provoke, but her presence demanded acknowledgement in a way he wasn't used to. The patrons watched silently, sensing a quiet battle of wills playing out before them. Captivated by her courage, he tried to regain control, opening his mouth to assert authority, but she anticipated his words before he spoke. "Power isn't about fear," she said softly, almost to herself, yet loud enough for him to hear, a subtle rebuke. Her tone carried confidence that unsettled him, the weight of her conviction stronger than any command he could give. He stared at her, a billionaire used to compliance, struggling to comprehend someone unafraid to challenge him. The tension lingered as she moved through the diner, serving others with grace while keeping her guard. Her calm, unwavering demeanor contrasted sharply with his frustration, creating a strange equilibrium in the room. For the first time, he felt powerless in a way money could never fix, unaccustomed to being confronted with dignity. And as she walked away, the message was clear. Respect had to be earned, not demanded, and she had done just that. The diner returned to its rhythm, but the air remained charged with the silent acknowledgement of her strength. The billionaire watched her carefully, recognizing that this encounter had shifted something within him. Nora had not only stood her ground, but had exposed a vulnerability in him that few ever saw. And in that moment, he realized that he had met his match in a small diner, served with coffee and courage. The next morning, the diner opened to the usual hum of early patrons, but the billionaire returned. He entered quietly this time, his sharp suit slightly rumpled, his eyes scanning for Nora as she moved among tables. She noticed him immediately, pausing mid-step with a subtle lift of her brow, unafraid to meet his gaze. "Good morning," she said lightly, her tone polite yet firm, as if yesterday had barely made a dent. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, clearly unsettled by her calm presence once more. "I wanted to apologize," he said, sitting at the counter where he had shouted the day before. She raised an eyebrow, a small smirk forming. "Apologize for what? Saying what you believed?" "Not exactly," he admitted, his voice lower, more reflective, as he avoided the words he truly felt. Patrons glanced their way, sensing the subtle tension and the change in his demeanor. Nora poured a cup of coffee, placing it in front of him carefully, her hands steady, her gaze unyielding. "You don't have to pretend," she said softly. "I know most people don't like being challenged." He looked down at the cup, realizing she had seen through his arrogance instantly, and it unnerved him. "I'm not used to people standing up to me," he confessed, his tone quieter than ever before. "Maybe that's because most people only see what they want to see," she replied, brushing crumbs from the counter. He watched her carefully, noticing the quiet strength in her posture, the way she carried herself with dignity. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and a strange respect began to bloom inside him. "Do you always have to be so fearless?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his voice, yet unsure how to engage. "Only when it matters," she replied without hesitation, her eyes locking with his, steady and unwavering. He chuckled softly, a rare sound in that diner, feeling a mix of frustration and admiration swirl inside him. For the first time, he understood that power wasn't always about control. It could be about restraint. The morning rush came and went, but they remained in that unspoken dialogue, watching and learning. She moved among the customers, polite, professional, never letting the past moment overshadow her day. He lingered at the counter, sipping coffee, silently observing how she navigated her space with confidence. Each small gesture from her spoke volumes, and he realized he was more captivated than he had ever allowed himself. By mid-afternoon, he gathered the courage to speak again, his voice careful, measured. "I underestimated you yesterday," he admitted, "and I don't usually admit that." She smiled faintly, a glimmer of warmth softening her features. "Most people do, eventually." Her words hung in the air, not mocking, just honest, and it struck him deeply. He leaned forward slightly, studying her eyes, seeing the intelligence and integrity she carried. "You've made me think," he said quietly, almost to himself, "about the way I treat people." She placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, their fingers brushing lightly, a simple connection forming. He felt the weight of his arrogance melt slightly, replaced by curiosity, respect, and perhaps something more. The sun began to dip outside, casting a golden glow through the diner windows, painting them in warmth. He finally spoke. "I'd like to know more about you. If that's not too forward, Dot." She met his gaze, reading the sincerity behind the words. "Maybe," she said softly, with careful deliberation. The billionaire realized that in a small diner, over coffee and quiet conversations, his world had quietly shifted. Weeks passed, and he returned often, each visit marked by mutual respect, small smiles, and gentle conversations. Nora remained professional, never yielding her ground, yet allowing a friendship to blossom naturally. The patrons noticed the change, too. The once intimidating billionaire now seemed humbled, patient, and attentive. It was a transformation that no boardroom, no deal, and no wealth could ever have bought. One rainy afternoon, he lingered at the counter, watching her interact with customers with warmth and grace. "You've changed me more than I expected," he admitted, his voice sincere, quiet, almost reverent. She laughed lightly, a melodic sound that made the room feel softer, lighter, like the tension had lifted. "I guess standing up to people sometimes works both ways," she said, a knowing smile in her eyes. He left the diner that evening feeling something he hadn't felt in years: genuine respect for another person. It wasn't about power, money, or control anymore. It was about seeing someone fully and honestly. And Nora realized, too, that in holding her ground, she had not only earned his respect, but also opened a door to understanding, change, and perhaps a connection neither of them expected when the shouting first began. By the next week, a routine had formed, quiet yet meaningful, built on mutual acknowledgement and cautious trust. They spoke in gentle tones, shared small laughs, and the diner became a place where both could simply exist. The billionaire learned to temper his temper. Nora learned the power of unwavering dignity, and the patrons watched in awe. It was proof that even the fiercest encounters could lead to understanding when both hearts were willing. And sometimes the smallest acts of courageous, steady gaze, a firm voice, a refusal to be intimidated, could change the course of someone's life entirely, even that of a man used to commanding the world. For the billionaire and the waitress, it was more than a lesson. It was the start of something quietly extraordinary. And in the heart of a small diner, over the hum of conversations and the scent of coffee, respect and understanding bloomed.